Okay, that was Grand Cross by Ringmaster. There it goes again. Let me get this off the screen. There we go. Hi, I'm Jayme CheeseSlice, and welcome to Uncontrolled Opposition. Today we're going to be talking about 9/11 and Building 7. So we're going to record an hour for the radio at WBAI and the Progressive Radio Network. And after that recording is done, we might have a little bit of discussion afterwards, and then we'll wrap up the show. So let's get to this recording right now. Gloria is going to be hosting with Jayme Kuzmarov. So let's bring them on. Hi, Gloria and Jayme. How you guys doing?
Hey, Jayme.
And our guest today is Kristen. I don't know how you say your last name. Gasparini.
Hi.
Yes, welcome, Kristen.
Hi, nice to be here.
We're about to record our show. It's going to be an hour, and Gloria's going to kick it off with her monologue. Let's do it.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to Uncontrolled Opposition, where together we battle mind wars with truth strikes. I'm Gloria Guillo, an investigative journalist, and I'm here with my co-host, Professor Jayme Kuzmarov, managing editor of Covert Action magazine. Today's guest is Kristen Gasparini, singer, songwriter, indigenous land rights activist, and 9/11 truther, to discuss her investigations into the so-called unexplainable collapse of Building 7. Our producer and engineer is Jayme CheeseSlice. The opinions you hear are ours and that of our guest, not those of WBAI, the Pacifica Foundation, or the Progressive Radio Network. Every 9/11, we have the patriotic duty to remember the biggest false flag on American soil since Pearl Harbor. Unlike Pearl Harbor, 9/11 was not a let it happen event. It was more of a come and get it event, with the Project for a New American Century's cabal ringing the dinner bell with the release of their 2000 report titled Rebuilding America's Defenses. Talk about a smoking gun motive. Well, here you have it. More about this later. On 9/11, we also have the opportunity to honor the final act of bravery of New York City's first responders and the chance to grieve their murder, as we also mourn the callous extermination of nearly 3,000 civilians, mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, and even children, and all military personnel killed and wounded in subsequent forever wars. Both my sons were inspired by 9/11 to defend our country and join the Navy. Not only are we New Yorkers, but we are a patriotic family and love our country. But it seems all these deaths were nothing more than collateral damage to our government, manipulated behind the scenes by Paul Wolfowitz, Donald Rumsfeld, and Dick Cheney under the leadership of George Bush Sr. at the behest of the predator class. They had already laid the groundwork in the late 90s to enter us into his New World Order concept, which metastasized in 2001 as anti-terrorism. Now we have the receipts. Without 9/11, our government could not justify pirating the resources and lifeblood from 7 countries in 5 years, as described by Colonel Wesley Clark. Without 9/11, our government could not shove down our throats the unconstitutional Patriot Act, an act that robbed us of our fundamental rights to privacy, security, and due process. On 9/11, I was there. I watched it happen in real time with my own eyes. From my terrace, I saw fires burn and the first building collapse. I screamed when it happened, as did all my Brooklyn Heights neighbors. Most were watching from their respective balconies and rooftops, or with open windows. It was unexpectedly shocking. It looked like controlled demolition on the scale of a Hollywood blockbuster movie. On 9/11, it was a sunny morning with blue skies before it turned to night as a tidal wave of gray flake dust overtook the East River and swallowed us whole. I didn't yet have the facts that we have today, but I instantly knew the world was being dealt a rotten hand by the Bush administration to profit the predator class at our expense again. Now we know about the neocons' year 2000 report that promotes full spectrum dominance, total control of land, sea, air, space, and cyberspace, preemptive wars to shape the global environment, large-scale military spending to maintain U.S. supremacy, regime change in Iraq, Iran, Syria, and others. The report boldly states the process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. Seems to me they decided to go in the direction of manifesting a catastrophic and catalyzing event to hurry up their clearly stated goals. What do you think? Please let us know. How many truthers are we? Now back to the morning of 9/11. Like anyone that saw the buildings collapse, I received a sucker punch, which literally knocked the wind out of me. I recall clutching onto the terrace railing for support. Why, you might ask? It's because the fires were obviously too high up on the buildings to weaken the bottom floors and cause a cascading collapse. At worst, we all expected that maybe a couple of floors of the building would slide off to the side and crash to the ground. But that didn't happen. I kept waiting for the military jets to scramble and patrol our skies on standard hijacking protocols, but the jets never came. Later, we found out that on 9/11, our military pilots and air traffic controllers were busy on a simultaneous NORAD drill. They didn't know what was real and what was a drill. They were confused. What a coincidence, you might say. Then there's Building 7, The Ugly Orphan in the Skyscraper trilogy that most don't know about. World Trade 7 is a linchpin in the truth movement. It was a 47-story steel frame skyscraper, which in approximately 7 seconds collapsed symmetrically, pulverizing into its own footprint at 5:20 p.m. on 9/11. First responders and survivors heard explosions prior to the collapse. Today's guest, Kristen Gasparini, wasn't in New York that day. She was just 5 years old and living in Italy. As a student, Kristen discovered the 9/11 truth movement and began investigating the lies and cover up herself. That journey inspired her to share what she's learned with her peers, not only as a writer, but also as a musician using her platform to raise awareness. The predator class knows that if we tug on the string of lies associated with 9/11, their whole narrative falls apart at the seams, and we will see their lies everywhere. The empire has no clothes, and once the truth genie is out of the bottle, it can't be put back in. Kristen, please tell us how and why you became interested in the collapse of Building 7 and what our audience needs to know to understand the truth. Thank you.
Hi, Gloria, and thank you so much for this introduction. I think it touched on very many of the most important points. And thank you for using the word empire. I think this is what we're all dealing with, is a rogue empire. And this kind of cuts to the very core of the narrative that sustains it. So as you said, I was 5 years old, I was watching TV, and then every channel just changed to the same thing, which were the towers burning and collapsing. And I went to my mom to tell her, Mom, TV's broken. And then she came to the room and started crying. And she said there was going to be a war. And that was the day that I learned the word war and kind of what it meant. Not that I understood it at the time. And then coming back from my gap year in South America, which is when I first got acquainted to farmer and indigenous communities, just trying to hold on to their lands and to their traditional food production methods and to their freedoms. My dad told me to be very careful entering specifically Wellesley College, which is where Hillary Clinton went to school, at the time when she was running against Donald Trump. So it was the 2016 election, and I was a freshman. And I was kind of at risk of falling into the category of, I guess, petty, cancel culture-y, social justice warrior who was like, oh, we need to, vote for Hillary no matter what because Trump is a monster. Not that he isn't, or that, we're not like just looking at it all being done quicker in terms of the dismantling of the United States and the affirmation of totalitarianism and fascism. But I think it was very useful for him to try and encourage me to look beyond appearances and at how, at the end of the day, whatever party you look at in the United States, was essentially a two-party system, but it's essentially a one-party system. These politicians respond to the same powers behind the curtains. And so he encouraged me to look at the time it was the controversy around Syria and all the propaganda that was coming out of Syria, specifically from white helmets, to try and make us hate the Assad regime. We're like all clearly seeing what's happening with the regime in Syria. It's essentially like a client regime again. And then because I was sort of like resisting his suggestions and was very adamant that we shouldn't elect a racist or like an explicit racist in government, then he just showed me the video of Building 7. And I had no idea it existed. And I said, well, what's this? I was like, oh yeah, so that's the third building that fell that day. And I was like, what? And, I think, like I say this often, like, I probably should have suspended judgment. I probably should have said, right, now I'm going to do all of like the due diligence and look at exactly what happened and look at all the physics. But at some point, intuition is a perfectly valid and important way of knowing. And I just knew then and there that we were screwed beyond what I thought we were screwed as a collective. And then I was depressed for about 6 months. I didn't speak up very much my first semester of college. I was very scared of being judged, confused, wondering whether I should even be in college, because immediately I realized, right, so I'm entering this institution, which basically just like churns out empire functionaries, and I'm expected to like get this degree and then obey and get a job, have a career, pay taxes. All the taxes go to weapons that kill people all over the world. Like, what's the point? So I was like depressed for 6 months and then slowly came out of it. And then my sophomore year, I decided I would speak up about it, because I just knew I couldn't just go on pretending like I didn't know. And I didn't find value in trying to live this, prescribed life of, well, if you shut up and just, kind of make it through, like you can hope to be one of the more comfortable slaves in this slavery system. And so I took a class in news and politics at the time, and my final presentation was on World Trade Center 7 and how it didn't receive media attention at the time, and how it's not included in the 9/11 Commission report. And the professor was really uncomfortable and tried to suggest that I switch classes. And when I gave the presentation, she just sort of like sat there.
Wow.
Yeah. And but it went well. And I had contacted architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth at the time to ask them for some data that I could use in the presentation. And then I sent them the presentation that a friend had taken a video of. And then Richard Gage contacted me and asked if we could talk on the phone. And we had a phone call, and he was like, I'll put you in touch with Andy Steele. You guys should get organized in case you want to volunteer for us. And that summer I volunteered, and I called tens and tens of architecture and engineering offices in New York City to ask if they would want to have like a further education program. That's what they call them, where architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth would basically do a teach-in about Building 7. And of all the, people who just like hang up on you, a couple did actually take the class, and that's how they built their massive following on their petition, which includes, I think, at this point, more than 3,600 architects and engineers nationally and internationally. And then in the subsequent years, I just kept taking classes. I chose philosophy as my major because I kind of understood that sort of like the fundamental issue is that we are caught up in a propaganda system which muddies, collective truth making and collective sense making. And so I really wanted to understand that side of the issue. And so what I ended up focusing on in general is called social epistemology, which just basically means how do we know what's true collectively? And I took class, because it's liberal arts, I took classes in history, IR, politics, all to do with sort of like trying to understand this broader context. And then there was another professor who tried to kick me out of his class and deleted my post on the class forum and couldn't answer the question of how many buildings fell on 9/11 at Ground Zero, even though he taught the class on 9/11 at Wellesley College. I'll leave the names out, but probably easy to figure out who that is.
Jeremy's a professor, and he's I think he's squirming over there hearing that.
Well, yeah, a couple questions, but yeah, first, that is totally unethical. The professors are supposed to encourage a free and independent inquiry. So if he's deleting posts or threatening you, that is against the code of our profession, and a disgrace to what the university is supposed to be all about. I mean, he can assess the evidence. If you're presenting certain evidence, I think it's his responsibility to engage with that evidence. If he finds flaw in your reasoning, that is reasonable on his part to contradict what you're saying or to present alternative evidence or to poke holes in your argument. However, to discourage you from discussing that or censoring you is against the creed of the profession. Unfortunately, we are seeing a lot of that now in academia. So I'm glad you're speaking out against this, because in some ways that's, well, I think today we want to address two issues. The first being, what exactly happened to World Trade Center 7, but the side issue is the censorship over this issue, including relating within the confines of higher education and general education, because kids should learn and also should be encouraged to critically investigate big events like this. And I think you hit it on the nose when you said this is a crucial event as far as the empire and how it justifies its predatory behavior. And I just had an article about 1 trillion. Now we've reached a budget, a military budget of 1 trillion.
I read the article just today, and I hoped we could get into that as well, because it's just the core issue, really.
Yeah. So as a question, and maybe we can get into this issue of censorship and what's going on our campuses. But the first question, maybe you can briefly summarize. So since you've now done a lot of, because you became interested in this topic and understand its importance, you did all this research. Can you maybe just summarize in 2 to 3 minutes, boil it down for our listeners, what was rotten or what was fake about the official narrative of World Trade Center 7, and what are the major findings in your research?
So NIST described the collapse as caused primarily due to fire, and this would be the first ever building in the history of high rises to collapse solely due to fire. This is in their report. They reported no explosions. They reported a new kind of progressive collapse, and this is the institution that is part of the federal government. So it's a branch of the Department of Commerce. What's problematic with this explanation is that inside the building, a person was trapped for some hours because an explosion blew out the staircase. His name was Barry Jennings. He was rescued by firefighters, reported the explosion in an interview that is available online, and then an interview that he gave to Dylan Avery for Loose Change, which was one of the first 9/11 documentaries to be produced. But NIST did not include the testimony of Barry Jennings in its report. Barry Jennings died of sudden causes the day before the report was published in 2007. The other thing to note is that you cannot possibly, this is a theory of knowledge, epistemology, just, groundworks assertion, just like a fact. You cannot predict something that has never happened before. It's an impossibility. Logically, however you want to put it, you cannot predict something that has never happened before. If Building 7 is the first ever building to collapse solely due to fire in the history of high rises, it makes no sense, however you want to explain it, that the BBC should announce the collapse 20 minutes before it happened, that CNN should announce the collapse an hour and something before it happened, that firefighters, officers, and journalists on the ground should be recorded on video saying, "Watch out for Building 7, that's the building that's going to come down next." How on earth is that possible if this is the first ever event of its kind? Answer: it's impossible. There was foreknowledge because the building did not come down solely due to fire. Barry Jennings reported the explosion. Many other people reported the explosions. And the working theory that should be, publicized in massive public debate is that the building was demolished. And this is what Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth and Leroy Halsey's team at University of Alaska Fairbanks have concluded, after years and years and years of studies that are so complete that one asks at this point, like, there's nothing else to study because it's just been done ad nauseum. The issue here is that NIST has never agreed to publicly debate architects and engineers, and there was never a garnering of mass attention around the issue, which is what I think would be the solution to a lot of the quagmire that we're in and the stall and the paralysis that we're in advancing not just the truth movement, but really the anti-war movement, the green movement, the social justice movement, the movement for freedom in Palestine. All of these issues converge at 9/11 one way or the other, and this is the easiest way to take the narrative down.
Yeah, that's very well said. And I don't know if you've studied other aspects of 9/11. How would this fit with a broader pattern of deceit regarding those events and manipulation?
So, Building 7 contained offices that were relevant to the cover-up of the overall state crime that is 9/11. It contained offices of the Department of Defense, Secret Service, CIA, IRS, Securities and Exchange Commission. These offices lost massive amounts of documents with regards to hot IPO allocations that were going on in the years immediately prior to 9/11, dot-com bubble, WorldCom, etc. So this is really about destruction of evidence as it pertains to Building 7. If we want to go further, and architects and engineers for 9/11 do, the Twin Towers were also demolished, as Gloria also said in her introduction. If you look at the buildings, they are exploding. There is no way that kind of collapse is caused by the gravity of the top part of the building falling onto the lower part. That, I think, relates more broadly to an effort to avoid the regulation of the financial capture of the United States by a mafia, effectively, within the Department of Defense that had been stealing money probably since, like, the end of World War II, to be honest, but more consistently since apparently like the mid 1990s. The day before 9/11, Donald Rumsfeld announced $2.3 trillion missing or unaccounted for in the DoD budget. And the day after 9/11 happened and everybody forgot about it, today that figure, or by 2020, that figure was 35 trillion. At this point, it's probably like about like 50 trillion or something.
If I might interrupt for a second, we had John Kiriakou on our last show, and John was at the Pentagon on 9/11, and he observed things. And, as he was discussing things, I asked him, well, was the accounting office hit? And he was like, yeah. So it just so happens that all of these trillions that Rumsfeld is describing or missing, the place where the evidence would be, where you could look for it, just magically goes poof.
Whoops.
Back to you, Kristen.
Yeah, but that's clearly another one of those coincidences, right? So yes, absolutely. This is about the capture of the state by this mafia, which one could trace back to, end of World War II, Eisenhower warning about like the takeover of the military-industrial complex, and possibly, likely, the convergence of elements within the United States with, ex-Nazi scientists, because then you have like the whole universe of Operation Paperclip, MK Ultra, which, is also the foundation of the study of mass psychology and the manipulation of mass psychology. So Operation Mockingbird, all of these elements, of course, intertwine. And 9/11 was as much, sorry.
I just like to interject, Kristen's from Italy. She's Italian. So, things of the mafia. But we look at it more in the United States as organized crime. And I mean, Jeremy,
I'm using it in that sense. I'm saying mafia, but
yeah,
that's what it means.
I know you mean. I know you
Pardon.
mean organized crime.
Yeah.
Jeremy and I talk a lot about this relationship between organized crime and the CIA. It's one of our favorite topics. So what you're saying is completely well grounded in facts that we know very well. So we have nothing other to say about it than yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, so but this is I think really important for people to understand that the tax dollars that doesn't go towards education, that doesn't go towards healthcare, that doesn't go towards infrastructure, that doesn't go towards creating jobs, literally is going to fund covert operations, to finance already grotesquely wealthy contractors and military companies, and to sustain a system of extraction worldwide of neocolonialism that still functions through genocides and land grabs and exploitations of minerals under the soil. This is our money, and I'm not from the US, but I just speak from the perspective of a global north that is de facto captive to like the NATO sphere, or the Anglo-US empire, however you want to call it. We are all caught up in this dynamic, and it starts with the ability of the United States to exercise the strongest military force on the planet. The system of violence is really, like, if we want to go as far to say that it's really what keeps up the value of the dollar at a time where it's not pegged to gold, where it's not pegged to oil necessarily anymore. The global financial system, as I understand it, stands on the ability of the United States to wage war and control waterways for the transfer of resources, whether in markets or whether it's raw resources. It doesn't really matter. But this is the world that we live in. We live in a world where everything economically functions because the United States is the biggest bully, and we agree to let them operate in the way that they do. And unless this stops, the bully is going to start, and it's already happening. It's going to start to suppress its own people. When we see.
Now you wrote a paper, and that was how I reached out to you. I read your paper, and I saw a little bit of your interview, and I thought, wow, you'd make a great guest because, I was there, and I'm an American, and I'm a New Yorker, and all that stuff. And I'm just really taken by your interest about this topic, which really affected my life, the life of my family, very much so. And we were not as affected as others. So I think it's very encouraging that a student.
You said you had two sons who went to the Navy.
Yeah, they were in the Navy. So yeah, they joined specifically because they wanted to defend our country, because we're a patriotic family. This is why we're doing this stuff. So it's very encouraging to hear that that you were inspired to be involved in this. And I'd like us to go back to some of the details in your paper, which I found very interesting, because you brought to light, and Kristen's paper has been edited and organized so that it can be produced in Covert Action magazine. And Jeremy said that he's putting it on 9/11 on that day, right, Jeremy?
Yeah, we planned for the 9/11 anniversary.
So it's going to be a featured article on 9/11. So that's really, really wonderful. So I'd kind of like you to go more into the like kind of bit by bit the things that you uncovered that really struck you, as well as also you had brought up this gentleman who had heard the explosions, was trapped. And I found out. Now, I worked at the New York City Housing Authority. That was my final place in New York City government before I left government. And I didn't know this guy. I knew things about it, but I had never met him, and I didn't know that we had someone that the New York City Housing Authority had a firsthand witness in that building who presented a report. So I was really fascinated to learn that information, and I just have to say that I've always been studying this topic since it happened, and this one just went right by me. So you have a lot of really interesting facts, and I think if you go into him a little bit, it'd be quite interesting if you can recall, and some other things that you brought up that I think are really our audience should know. And thank you.
Yeah, it's just astonishing once you begin studying these topics how many details there's. Just even people who have studied it for a very long time will just like either go over your head or like you'll never find, because the censorship machine is so intense and it's speeding up at this time actually. So architects and engineers actually have an initiative to digitize everything and sort of like have it available in the face of this further censorship. But yeah, Barry Jennings was working at the Office of Emergency Management in Building 7. People had already, I think, left the office that morning, but like he went upstairs and found everyone gone. Like there were hot cup coffees like left on the desks, and was like, okay, I better get out as well. And as he was descending, an explosion blew out the staircase between like the 8th and the 6th floors. And he thought he'd be dead. Like he thought he would not get out of there. But maybe like an hour or something later, firefighters came and rescued him. And he was escorted out through the lobby. And he says how there was no lobby, like it was completely trashed by like some other kind of explosion. So NIST says that we have not heard witnesses of explosions, or NIST's very smart, clever excuse for this is that the explosions that witnesses reported were not loud enough for us to consider controlled demolition, which is a bogus argument. Like, what do you mean they're not loud enough? They're assuming that the explosives were RDX, whereas it could have been other kinds of explosives. People who are experts in the field say that it was probably more akin to nanothermite, which produces like smaller explosions, but that burn very, very hot and produce melted steel, which is what we observed in Building 7 and the craters of the Twin Towers as well. Like firefighters, first responders, and people who were working on the cleanup sites reported melted steel like flowing like lava in those holes. So this is NIST's excuse to say that there were no explosions. But you have this guy who is literally trapped in the building who's telling you, I couldn't get out because an explosion blew out the staircase. He is interviewed. Immediately, his feet touch the ground outside the building. He said, big explosion. I thought I was going to die. The interview is available. I think I have linked it in the article, so you can just like watch it with your own eyes. And then mysteriously dies the day before the report comes out. Another coincidence. So this is just like one of the details of the whole Building 7 saga that you could focus on. But there's the fact that NIST didn't produce the as-drawn drawings for Building 7. They produced their own drawings so that they could leave out shear studs, which is just like a component that would make it impossible for the structural elements to shift the way that they said they shifted to produce the internal collapse. There's the fact that the fires that they said that they were burning so hot that it caused thermal expansion were actually not burning that hot. And there's photographic evidence. There's the fact that from video evidence, and there's abundant video evidence from different angles, different distances. If you know the height of the building and you know how far the video was made, you know at what acceleration or what speed the building is coming down. It's coming down at free fall acceleration, which literally means there's no structural support below it. If there's no structural support below it, it means that the structure was all taken out at the same time. How do you do that without explosives? How do you do that without some kind of controlled demolition? Another detail, that anecdote, is in Wellesley, I actually interviewed almost the entirety of the physics department at the time with an excuse that I was doing an electronic music project, and I was just going to ask them a question, and they would just like answer, like basing their answer on their knowledge of physics and mechanics, Newtonian mechanics, not relativity, like Newtonian mechanics. And I showed them the video of Building 7 collapsing, just like a compilation of the video of the building falling from different angles. And it was of 8 professors. 1 refused to answer, and she was like, "Nope, I'm not going to answer this. This is irrelevant. I'm not sure why you're asking me this, but I don't want to participate." I'm like, "Okay, fine." But the other professors initially looked at the video, had no idea what they were looking at, and they all answered, "Yeah, there was some kind of detonation at the base of the building that made it fall symmetrically onto its own footprint." And I have the recordings. It's probably illegal for me to do anything with them at this point. I'm not sure. But I have those recordings of these professors answering in this way. And then I told them what it was. And then some of them were like, "Oh, okay." And some of them were like, but I think we should focus on climate change." And others were like, and others were like, no, but then it was a fire. So, but the initial response was pretty consistent. So there's so much we could go into, but it's also not infinite. The list of things is long, but it's not infinite because it's a simple thing to look at. It's not quantum physics. It's easily the simplest element that we could focus on across the political spectrum. And this is another plan that I hope to publish on a Substack to sort of like explain how I think this is the shortcut. This is the shortcut to get us all where we want to get, which is take power away from this organized crime within the military of the United States and perhaps worldwide, because I don't exclude the fact that, these economies intersect favorably across nation borders. Like there is a lot of talk of transnational powers taking over where like individual nations are sort of like, puppets sort of like that are being used to justify like a more comprehensive takeover of the globe, at least insofar as, military surveillance and economics is concerned. What was I saying? Oh my gosh.
Just keep coming back to the building because the facts are fascinating.
I think this is just like the quickest way because you have very solid evidence from many different sources, whether it's architects and engineers, whether it's the University of Alaska Fairbanks study.
Hey, Jeremy, maybe you can get a job in Fairbanks. I mean, Jeremy's a fantastic history professor, and because he teaches the truth, he's been marginalized. It's I mean, it's not that good professors don't exist; they're there. It's that they are controlled, and if they speak the truth, they are removed. So
other professors at Wellesley had told me, "Look, I would like to help you, but I don't have tenure." As simple as that. So I understand that.
Even with tenure, if you color outside the lines, they'll come for you. I mean, it's very difficult. We've had not only Jeremy, but 2 other professors, and they were also teaching the truth, and you're not allowed to do that these days. I was fortunate. I had my education in the 70s and early 80s. And at that point, professors were able to teach. They weren't as moderated as they are now. Now, it's a shame.
Yeah.
And there was a very good article by David Hughes on the IR profession and their miserable failure on 9/11.
Yes.
and he's managed to keep his job. He teaches somewhere in England, and it's a very, very detailed essay. He just goes into a lot of the whole, and he has, I think, good discussion of the Building 7 and just other aspects of the 9/11 narrative, and just fact based. And he just lambastes the IR profession, that they don't deal with this at all, or they just attack anyone who broaches the topic as conspiracy theorists and blacklist them. But I mean, the facts as you're describing are pretty clear cut. And I mean, there's also the pattern in American history. Most wars in American history are based on false flag incidents, because in a democracy, the public generally is reluctant to go to war, and they have to really whip up certain hysteria and fervor, and that's usually through manufactured incidents. And yeah, I plan to write a book one day, dealing with just different chapters and culminating with more recent history that you're discussing. But I mean, if you look at the Pearl Harbor incident, the evidence is clear that the Japanese were provoked and that there was foreknowledge. In fact, the evidence, it was documented in Army Commission, because George Marshall he was the Army Chief of Staff. He had the information about the Pearl Harbor attacks, and it's known that the Army cryptologist had cracked the Japanese code, and he had the information early in the morning Washington time, which is middle of the night, and all he had to do was pick up a scrambler phone. And there was an Army commission that investigated this and asked him why he didn't pick up the scrambler phone, and he said because his answer was, well, the Germans might have heard what I was saying, which is totally irrelevant, because all he had to do was pick up the phone, alert the Hawaiian naval commanders, and they could have counteracted it. So it's presented as a conspiracy, but the documentation is there. This was even addressed in an Army commission, and he said it outright that he didn't pick up the scrambler phone, and he gave some weird excuse. So that's just one major incident, but it's a pattern of history. And I mean, it's, if more people were aware of it, I think they would stand up to it, because these wars are ultimately cataclysmic for society. They cause millions of deaths. They skew our public policy. It's horrible for everybody. So
I
Except for
wanted to
those
ask.
usually.
I just wanted to ask Jeremy. Jeremy and I had done a show on the Oklahoma City bombing that centered on Jeremy's research into the Oklahoma City bombing. And Jeremy, could you relate the Oklahoma City bombing to 9/11? Was it a rehearsal?
I believe so, based on my research, and I didn't know anything about this. I just I thought of the standard view when I was a teenager and that a bombing occurred. But then I moved to Oklahoma, and I met people who told me that there were two bombs, and told me the official story was wrong, and then recommended a documentary. And anyway, I researched it, and I came to the conclusion that it was, and the evidence is overwhelming. Again, all the scientists, just like what Kristen was saying, they were unanimous that it was a controlled demolition, that the fertilizer bomb they attributed to Timothy McVeigh and his Ryder truck could not have caused the damage. Impossible that could have caused the damage that was caused in the Murrow building. It had to be caused by high-grade military explosives, one after the other. Top physicists all said this. Even the founder of the hydrogen bomb said that. And they noticed people, and there were two explosions, not the one with the fertilizer bomb. That was like a diversion. And they noticed people in the days before planting equipment in the basement. So all the evidence pointed to controlled demolition, or inside explosives, and that was a prelude to what they did with the Building 7. The other parallel, that they destroyed they destroyed the whole building very rapidly after the bombing, so it couldn't be properly investigated.
Yes. This is the other element, is that by law, when you have a situation of this kind, the scene the scene, the whatever the remnants of the building, is the crime scene. You need to preserve that, and you need to analyze that to understand exactly what happened. Instead, Building 7, the scraps of Building 7 were removed before those of the Twin Towers, where potentially you had human remains. So they first removed Building 7 and shipped all the scrap to China and shipped all the metal to China. And there is one damning photo of John Gross of NIST standing in front of a piece of molten steel, which they said wouldn't be there. If you have steel that looks melted and like Swiss cheese, it means that the temperature were much, much higher than the ones that NIST says caused the building to collapse. But all that steel was shipped off to China to recycle. And so the crime scene was not actually analyzed. And this was brought up by Eric Lawyer of Firefighters for 9/11 Truth, who then just explained in general, like all of the inconsistencies and all of the illegal management of the crime scene of 9/11 and how it's, just unacceptable in any way, shape, or form to have authorized that.
Yeah, and we're supposed to believe. I mean, these agencies are not totally incompetent, and most U.S. law enforcement agencies are not. They often do solve murders, and they have very good investigative teams. And we're supposed to believe that in these major incidents, they just are just totally incompetent and a bunch of buffoons. I think that's what they want to have people believe, that the law enforcement is totally incompetent, when really they know they can't carry out, they've been threatened or intimidated, and they don't carry out a proper investigation.
Not just that, and maybe this might be an interesting detail to end on. I see that we don't have very much time left, but one interesting element of the 9/11 story that is not often talked about is P-TECH. P-TECH was a cybersecurity company that essentially allowed the simultaneous infiltration of very many governmental cybersecurity agencies, or agencies in general, in a way that was covert. And this was discovered by Indira Singh, who at the time was working for JP Morgan, trying to sort of come up or engineer a system of like company oversight. So how do we make sure that money laundering doesn't happen? How do we make sure that, problems, like how do we prevent problems from arising before they do? She was like one of the smartest people there, and just sort of like trying to figure this out. And she came across P-TECH because that's the company that, they had suggested she work with. And then she found out that there was like some massive conflicts of interest and like shady people behind this company who's like based in Quincy, Massachusetts, and that type like some shady figures from the Middle East with possible ties to terrorist organization and whatnot, or extremist organization in any case. And she was supposed to be in the Twin Towers that morning, but got stuck in traffic and was not murdered, and so could let the cat out of the bag. But yeah, so in terms of like understanding like so many of these other elements of 9/11, like how did jets like not fly in the skies? How did we, how was it just like such a big like mess
whoops.
that
Such a big whoops.
All such a big, like that's an interesting thing to look at, especially today when we're seeing that like these, intelligence companies are being powered by AI at this point. So if you like combine something with the potential and capacity of P-TECH with like all this new technology, the control grid, as some people call it, that is being built is something for massive concern, because you now have the ability to infiltrate people, organization, pit people against each other, like without being detected. That's what should concern us. Like if somebody somewhere in power doesn't like you, your life can just be ruined and you'll never know why. Like this is the level at which we are. we are we are going to operate at this point. Like the infiltration of every aspect of civil society can be infiltrated without nobody knowing anything at any point in the process.
If I can mention one thing, Gloria, yeah, with the 9/11, I think people should also look into the hijackers, and two of the hijackers had, were allowed to come into the United States, and I think had background working with the CIA, and then also the official hijackers, the ones they listed as the hijackers weren't the real hijackers. Like some of those guys were found to be living in Saudi Arabia, and others had worked before for the CIA. So that needs to be, I think, more research could uncover exactly what was going on, and how those people may have been used as patsies, and how they used Muhammad Atta, how they set up like a legend for Muhammad Atta, and there were sightings of him and strange behavior. So, I mean, it fits with what they've done in past covert operation, like with Lee Harvey Oswald, where they created a certain persona, and also Timothy McVeigh, like they would have these guys stage incidents so people knew their name. Anyway, there's so many things to look into. This was obviously a very sophisticated criminal operation.
And going back to the rehearsal that perhaps was the Oklahoma City bombing, one other thing to look at is Operation Northwoods. I forget exactly what year it was, but this was a CIA operation to shoot down an American passenger plane over Cuba, to blame it over the Cubans, to justify the invasion of Cuba, and to get rid of Castro. And this was at a time where George H.W. Bush was already involved with the CIA. So this is like the literal blueprint. This is a literal rehearsal. Like, you are shooting down a plane to justify an invasion.
I have two things I wanted to say. One is, it seemed that what you were describing is techno-totalitarianism. So that's going to be our word for today, techno-totalitarianism. And the other thing I wanted to say is, I was one of the first people to get access to the site, because I worked in city government, and my office was very close, like a couple of blocks away from Ground Zero is what it was called. And I had to walk past it, and we walked past it with armed guards, and we had to have our badges around our neck, and we were checked at every street corner as we approached our jobs, and we were ordered back to work. Even though everything was smoking and it was quite dangerous, we were still ordered back to work by the mayor, because they wanted to open city government so that they could open Wall Street. And what I observed as I was walking through the kind of the wreckage was that it was dustified. There really wasn't very much. There was a couple of pieces of steel bent out of shape, that looked kind of melted. I couldn't really see, the composition of the steel, but you could see, the steel was bent. And then all around it was just dust, gray dust. It was, unusual that you didn't see desk chairs. You didn't see pieces of wing or pieces of anything. Everything was just pure dust. So I thought that was extremely curious at the time. And then I heard on the news that they found Muhammad Atta's passport, that his passport just kind of floated down from the plane, and that a bystander just happened to pick it up and hand it in to a police officer. And that was how they knew that Muhammad Atta was involved. And all of us who walked that walk and saw that left, because there was no way that could happen. It was so outrageous that the terrorists, the hijackers, the murderers, left a calling card. They just said, "Hey, here's the calling card. Here it is." I mean, seriously, it was one of the most implausible, impossible things to and something that Jeremy and I talk about all the time is how repetition is a form of brainwashing. And we could all say that for weeks and weeks after this tragedy, we were subject to repetition. How many times did you see these planes in this video hit the World Trade Center just constantly, day after day after day, second after second? It was such brainwashing that my dad, who lives out in Long Island, said that he saw the planes hit the World Trade Center. And I'm like, Dad, how could you see that? You live out in Long Island. How is that possible? And he said, well, I was watching television and I saw it on television. And so I'm like, Dad, you didn't see it on television. You didn't see it with your own eyes. You saw it on television. And he couldn't make the connection because he had watched the television so much that it became truth to him. And that is a brainwashing technique. It is a manipulation technique. And the only way we can get out of that is really to kind of not allow this to go on and to not watch CNN 24/7 and all of these these things, and to lose our own sense of analysis. So we've got to wrap it up. So let's go back to Kristen. Kristen, please tell our audience how they can follow your creative work.
You can follow me at Kristen Gasparini, just the way that it is spelled, on mostly YouTube, Instagram. I'm like that on Facebook as well, but I apologize. I am still building up the outreach platforms. I will be publishing something on Substack soon, so watch out for an article that kind of just explains how I believe that we can actually move forward from this in a way that is sort of at least energy intensive as possible, as focused as possible, and that kind of like embraces the different struggles that we all care about, whether it's Palestine, whether it's the environment, whether it's anti-war. I think that there is a way that we can all converge and find a solution.
And also, Kristen's article will be coming out on 9/11 on Covert Action Magazine's website, and you can look for it there too. And we just need to tell our audience that the opinions you hear are ours and that of our guest, not those of WBAI, the Pacifica Foundation, or the Progressive Radio Network. That wraps up our show for today. This is Uncontrolled Opposition. I'm Gloria Guillo, joined here by Professor Jayme Kuzmarov. Remember to like and share our broadcast. Your kind support keeps us going. Please find us on Substack, Twitter, X, and Podbeam. Thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you next week.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks, Kristen. Yeah, I may have to leave in a minute or two. So
yeah, I do too. So I'm going to kind of cut this short.
That's all right.
Thank
Thanks
you
for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was a good show. And this will be out on the radio soon, probably right around 9/11, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's how
it takes about a week to get our stuff on.
I think it'll be on Progressive Radio next week and maybe 2 weeks for WBAI. So that'll be good timing.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank
you guys so much.
Well, nice to see you in person, Kristen. We'll be
nice to see you too. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a good show.
And I'll keep in touch.
All right. See you guys.
And for those of you watching at home, thank you for watching. And we'll be back next week with another episode. This is Uncontrolled Opposition. Thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Don't want to